why else would she tweet it? And to me, what I don't really respect about what she has done is that she's trying to pretend like that was just a random tweet and it wasn't directed at anyone and it had no meaning. I did think it was kind of a clown move for him to go out in some public place and talk trash about his colleague. Hello, good people. Todd Shannon, data scientist, social commentator, and getter of the buckets. And unfortunately, we are continuing to cover this kind of civil war between Candance Owens and Ben Shapiro because it rages on. Now, when I did the video yesterday, there was an interview that Candace had done with Tucker Carlson that I was not aware of, and I hadn't watched it. I have watched it now, so we're going to bring in some of that content. But I really want to synthesize what I have basically come to understand is the root of this conflict, the root of this problem. And interestingly enough, it's not really necessarily so personal between him and Candace Owens, but rather there are other people who are in Ben Shapiro's crosshairs, ironically, Tucker Carlson himself, and what is a pretty prevalent kind of attitude and posture from what I call the America First lobby. Now, the America First lobby is kind of a new kind of wing of MAGA, I would say, and I don't necessarily say it's like a one-to-one overlap with MAGA, but there are a lot of people who have adopted this kind of America First mantra. And what it has kind of resulted in is a sort of indifference to whatever is happening outside of the United States borders. And in a way, it's healthy that we kind of re-examine our involvement in things that happen outside of our borders and outside of our country. But in another respect, I think it foments kind of a kind of moral indifference to many things that we shouldn't be morally indifferent to. And then there's kind of an assumption that an isolationist view of American policy is somehow America first, because there's kind of that thing where they're assuming what they should be trying to prove, which is to say, if we just don't get involved in anything that takes place outside of our borders, that necessarily serves our interest. I think that we can point to many situations in history, for example, World War II, for example, or maybe even World War I, which I am less familiar with, admittedly. But there's no case to be made that America or the West should not have gotten involved with World War II. It was a necessary evil, unfortunately. And as the Bible says, there's a time and place for everything under the sun. But this America First lobby seems to be at the root of the conflict that I think Ben Shapiro has with both Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and many of that ilk. So we're going to explore that because I think it'll give us greater insight into why this is such an issue. First, we're going to watch a conversation, or basically a response that Ben Shapiro had to something Tucker Carlson said many weeks ago. I was not aware of this, so take a look.
$1,000 a year. Now, you could call it genocide, you can call it whatever you want, but it's the death of over 100,000 Americans a year and the living death of millions.
Well, you can't call it genocide. It's not genocide.
So sure. I don't understand.
I'm sorry, people who are addicted to drugs and living outside
in Israel. And again, I want to add my voice to that because I'm a human being. But
oh, sure you do.
You
sound very outraged.
The outrage among Republican presidential candidates was so much more intense. One of them took to a bullhorn and started yelling about it. I get it, but no one would think to do that about the 100,000 American young people murdered every year. And
because who are you yelling at? Who are you yelling at? First of all, people are on bullhorns yelling about drug overdoses and the open border all the time. All the time. What is he even talking about? What he's attempting to do is minimize what happened in Israel. He's not attempting to maximize what happened in the United States. He's attempting to minimize, as though America can't walk and chew gum, morally speaking, at the same time.
So you've seen Ben Shapiro's comments there, and I have to say, there were no lies detected. I mean, I don't really understand how Tucker Carlson is trying to say, hey, yeah, we should be outraged about Israel, but 100,000 people are being murdered by fentanyl, by illegal drugs coming across our borders. First of all, when people overdose on drugs, although that is a tragedy, it is not a murder. It doesn't even come close to being the same sort of tragedy where 1,500 people die in one day in a single attack. That's like saying, oh, the tragedy of drugs coming across the border and people voluntarily ingesting them and accidentally overdosing, that's the same thing as 9/11. I mean, those things could not be further apart in their effect and in their emotional impact on the nation. And I understand, yes, it is a tragedy, but it is not the same kind of tragedy. And so you see Ben Shapiro, how passionate he is about that and how upset he is about that. And I got to say, I understand it because it really is. I mean, and I love Tucker Carlson and I respect him, but that's kind of a dumb opinion to have. I got to, if Tucker was in front of me, I would say the same thing. And I would say, Tucker, I respect you, but that's not a smart comparison. And if you're somebody like Ben Shapiro and your people have just been under attack and been slaughtered, and people in Israel, I don't think people understand this. They live literally under the constant threat of attack, and they always have to be looking over their back, much like we'd like to try to pretend is the case for black people in America, like cops are going to shoot you as you walk out of the street. The fact of the matter is that you're much more likely to be shot in a neighborhood where there's gangbanging by somebody that looks like you if you're black than the police. But that's an aside. The point is that there really is a real threat to Jewish life. They're a little tiny country surrounded by tens of millions of Arabs who hate them. And when they get slaughtered, and when you try to compare it to fentanyl come across the border and using words like murder and how our presidential candidates should be more outraged about that than they are about what's happening in Israel, I think it's a stretch. Now, with respect to the fact that it's happening in a foreign country, it is understandable. But once again, this is a feature of the America First lobby and their sort of indifference to things that happen outside of our borders. So this constant drawing of moral equivalencies where things that are not morally equivalent is a source of frustration for Ben Shapiro, I'm sure. And like I said, I understand it. Here's another example of Candace Owens doing the same thing, but a bit more close to home. Here's an example.
Can I ask you a question then, and on the subject of like moral equivalence? Because there's been all this sort of temptation, even from good-hearted people, to draw a sort of moral equivalence. Like this is just some cycle of violence, condemning the Hamas terror, but also what the IDF is doing and the civilians dying. It's all just this terrible cycle of violence. Where do you stand on that?
What do you mean? Sorry, if you could just clarify what you mean.
Yeah, do you draw a moral equivalence between what happened on October 7th and what Israel's doing in response?
I wouldn't use the term moral equivalence, but what I would say is that there absolutely should be a debate, a full-throated debate and a conversation about where the line gets drawn. You know, if somebody commits 9/11 and we lose 3,500 people, does that give us the permission to kill 1 million Iraqi civilians like we did? And I think that that's an academic discussion that should be had, and wanting to have that discussion doesn't make somebody, an Islamophobe or make somebody, a genocidal maniac. It almost is required to have that discussion. These are very serious discussions that should be had.
So listen, so you saw Candace Owens' comments, and, she hesitates because I think she does think that there is some sort of moral equivalence. And I think that this is, I think, from my perspective, it's a little more understandable why people have difficulties kind of saying, well, if innocent people in Gaza get killed, then how many of their lives are worth basically stopping this threat? And I think that's kind of the wrong question to ask, because you have to take into account, which I think is another source of frustration, you have to take into account everything that's happening there. The leadership of Gaza are intentionally putting their people in harm's way. And so they're counting on the fact that there's this conflict and there's this hesitation for Israel to retaliate, and the world's spotlight is on them. And they do that for this very reason. They do it to garner support and to cause that hesitation. And what Israel is being asked to do is they're being asked to care more about the children of Gaza than the Gazans do. And that's frustrating. I can understand that's frustrating. So the real question that Candace Owens and those of her ilk should be asking is, what obligation does Israel have to allow itself to be vulnerable to this kind of attack again. And there again, there's this vein that runs through the America First lobby that I find a little bit. I gotta tell you, from my perspective, it isn't clear to me that these people would be morally consistent if it was their children on the line, because the whole basis of the so-called America First lobby is that we need to take care of ours, right? We shouldn't be concerned about what's happening to other people. We need to take care of our own. And from the perspective of whether or not it is right for Israel to defend themselves, they kind of don't care, because what they're more concerned about is, well, if Israel retaliates, is that going to trigger a war that's going to force us to be involved? And to me, that's really the wrong angle. What you're saying is, Israel, you should leave yourself vulnerable so that we don't have to step up and offer any aid or help. And morally, I think that is the incorrect stance. Either Israel has the right to defend itself, and we should encourage them to defend themselves and do whatever they need to do that. And we need to do it, as the Bible says, you should do unto others as you would have others do unto you. You need to encourage Israel to do what they need to do as if it were your children and your family and your loved ones who are vulnerable to these sort of murders and senseless attacks. Because I got to be frank, I don't think that people are thinking in that way. This kind of indifference of the America First lobby, I think it's not necessarily healthy, because they construe objectivity with neutrality. And neutrality is just another word for indifference about the plight of others. So there's that. Now we're going to see Candace Owens in her interview with Tucker Carlson basically engage in what's called the Mott and Bailey fallacy. And the Mott and Bailey fallacy is where you take two things that are superficially similar. And the first one, the Mott, is easy to defend and no one would dispute it. And you use that as justification to defend a position that is much more controversial and not so obviously true. So let's listen that Candace Owens tried to draw some equivalence between her speaking out and having, quote, nuance about Black Lives Matter and the issue that she's talking about now, which she is clearly out of her depths on.
If we could take 3 steps back and give us the context for this debate, how are you on different sides of it? I haven't heard you endorsing Hamas, like you're not. No.
Well, I have not endorsed Hamas in any way, and yet people have interpreted things that I say, or actually rather things that I don't say. It's becoming very much reminiscent to me, and why I have used my platform to say this, of Black Lives Matter, where if you don't say anything, they say your silence is violence. If you say something and it's even-handed and it's nuanced, which is to say, during the times of Black Lives Matter, you might say, I don't support police brutality. Who does? I don't support racism. Who does?
The problem with what Candace is saying here is that she's being dishonest about her level of engagement with the content. And this came out in her conversation that she had with Ami Kozak, where he said, you're saying that you're being neutral and you're not saying anything, and somebody's saying silence is violence, but you are commenting on it. You are coming out and saying nobody has a right to commit genocide. Well, who's committing genocide? Who's even implying that Israel is trying to commit genocide? Israel has never implied or even attempted to commit some sort of genocide. If they wanted to commit genocide against the people in Gaza or in the West Bank, they could have done that. They have nuclear capabilities. They're much stronger militarily. If they wanted those people dead, they would already be dead. But when she came out and said, no government has the right to commit genocide, she is echoing talking points that left-wing lunatics and people who try to draw some moral equivalence between Israel defending itself and what Hamas is doing. She's echoing their talking points and once again pretending that she doesn't understand that's what she's doing. And maybe she's not pretending. Maybe she is that ignorant of the situation, which is more reason why she shouldn't be talking about it.
But also, I think that police are a crucial part of every city. We need to have policing in cities, so these calls to defund the police are immoral and wrong and are going to lead to more Black deaths. People didn't want that nuance. When following George Floyd, there was no nuance. You had to explicitly say defund the police. You had to post a Black square. If you didn't post a Black square on Instagram, by the way, specifically on the platform of Instagram, and you maybe were busy that day. Maybe you were in another country. Maybe you just didn't log on to Instagram. You were accused of being a racist. I'm seeing a lot of that behavior right now when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a conflict that I have seen every single person, including myself, condemn what happened on October 7th. Because who wouldn't condemn terrorism? It's obvious. Who would not condemn innocent Israelis dying? But if you then say that it is also sad when an innocent Palestinian child dies, suddenly this is pro-Hamas, or you need to say, even when you're talking about how sad it is that a child dies, you need to button that statement by saying, but that child was a human shield. That's not going to be my response. First off, as a mother, that's not going to be my response as somebody who is about to give birth when I see these images of children involved on both sides of the conflict.
No one is making the argument that it isn't sad when the child dies. But to not understand that the reason why a Palestinian or a Gazan child has died and a Jewish or Israeli child has died, one has been attacked intentionally and the other one is collateral damage. And you're trying to, once again, there's this concept of a moral equivalence, which is not right and not fair. And once again, Candace pretending not to understand that that is the reason why Ben and others are so upset with her. Then now she's being disingenuous. She's playing dumb, in my view. And once again, I like to say, when people are dumb, I have compassion. When they play dumb, it makes me mad. And that's what Candace is doing. Candace is a professional talking head. She parses words and she is an expositor of social, cultural phenomena. And for her not to understand that the importance of words and the nuance of arguments, she's the one talking about the nuance. How come she doesn't understand the nuance of the difference that when a Gaza child dies, often they die because the people in Gaza themselves make that child the target of the violence by using them as a human shield. That is a difference. And to try to basically omit that fact as if, no, well, it doesn't really matter. It's just, I'm just sad as a mother. I think that's disingenuous. And once again, she wouldn't be saying that if it was her kid who had died and someone was making the same claim.
And said that they are horrific. I am even keel on this matter, and yet people think that you need to be extreme. So people that have become more radical and extreme are perceiving a moderate stance as not enough. And
because I was about to say, people can disagree with you or agree with you or whatever, but you certainly don't seem radical on this topic.
I'm definitively not radical. My stance has not changed in terms of whether or not America should be involved in this conflict. Whether we were talking about Afghanistan, my comments have been clear. They've been documented for years. Whether we are talking about Ukraine and Russia, my comments have been clear and they have been documented. I mean, you can go back to me even talking about NATO expansion before things erupted between Russia and Ukraine, and having a meaningful discussion about how much expansion is too much expansion. How would we feel if we had troops on our border? These are things that should be allowed in an academic discussion. You should be able to sit on stage and should be able to debate these ideas without using ad hominem attacks to say that you're a pro-Putin puppet or you're pro-terrorism. Even in the aftermath of 9/11, something that we all remember as part of my childhood. I think I was in 7th grade at the time.
And what she shows in this little conversation that she's having with Tucker is, once again, her isolationist view of politics. So that's why I want to just take a little time to talk about the America First lobby and their mindset. There is a contingent of people in America First that thinks that we should just stay out of everything. And although I can appreciate that sentiment, I think that it needs to be demonstrated that that is actually the best thing for us, right? I do think that an America First sentiment should be something that we entertain and that is a North Star, right? That guides our policy and our decisions. But the America First lobby is acting like it is self-evidently true that we shouldn't be involved in any of these conflicts and trying to say, well, they're all the same. Anything that happens outside of our border are the same. Well, the last I checked, Islamic terrorism is a threat to the United States. The only place in the world where it is more of a threat is in Israel. So it is not evident to me that us assisting Israel in defeating Islamic terror, that doesn't serve our interests. Now, I am smart enough to know not to have strong opinions about things that I do not understand. I am not a geopolitical or military expert. I do not understand what the downhill consequences would or could be if we get involved. All I'm saying is that if someone's saying we shouldn't get involved, you can't just say America first. That's why. That's not an argument. You're presupposing a thing that you should be trying to prove. But I really do think it's interesting that Candace says at the end of this last statement that we should be able to have these conversations without people saying that you're a pro-Putin puppet. But where Candace gets inconsistent is she's saying, well, people should be able to make this claim without ad hominem attacks about being a pro-Putin puppet. But at the same time, look at how she goes in on Nikki Haley, which I find kind of interesting.
So, why isn't Nikki Haley getting laughed off the stage?
Well, Nikki Haley is someone that I would describe as radical. She's a radical in this moment, and she's trying to present her opinions as not radical by hiding behind a terrorist attack, and it's not going to age well. So right now in this moment, people are like, this rhetoric is totally fine. You're going to look back in a year, and people are going to say, actually, this was kind of crazy, some of the things that she said. She, in my view, has become increasingly radical every time she even hits the debate stage. I don't even know, what country she's running for president in.
Right.
And I think Vivek Ramaswamy called her out accurately. And based on even my own personal experiences with her, which I've documented on my podcast, as somebody who isn't looking to actually win president, doesn't want to become president of the United States, what she's looking to do is to secure certain contracts after she leaves the stage and she loses. And so for her, the motive are relationships that she's going to build and money that she's going to earn, as best evidenced by the fact that when Nikki Haley left her ambassadorship, she was broke, and now she's a millionaire, a multimillionaire. And you have to ask how that happens. And Vivek Ramaswamy has had the courage to talk about her contract with Boeing. So her concerns are not about American citizens whatsoever, which is why it's all about sort of kowtowing to the person that I think that she believes, or to people that she believes can write her the biggest checks. That's been my assessment of Nikki Haley from the very beginning. It's still my assessment now.
So I find that fascinating that here is Candace Owens trying to say people should be able to make an argument without being attacked, without having their character impugned. And what does she do? She's saying Nikki Haley's policy prescriptions have nothing to do with America's interests. She's just trying to enrich herself. Now, that may be true. I don't know if it's true or not. And I have to say to you, I have never understood the appeal of Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley, to me, it's like, I don't even understand how she's still in the race. She's never appealed to me. I'm just like, what has she ever done? She doesn't have any original ideas. I just don't understand why Nikki Haley is popular in this race. But that's a far cry from saying she just wants to line her pockets with the blood of American soldiers. I don't understand how she can stand there and do that and also try to say, I should be able to have and we should be able to have the conversation about my opinions without someone attacking and impugning my character. Which is it, Candace Owens? This to me, this kind of exposes sort of the weakness of the America First lobby, which is kind of really, there's a vein of America First-ism that is contributing to the conflict between Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro. Whereas you have these America First people who think that it is self-evidently true that anyone who thinks that we should go to war is just money hungry and bloodthirsty, which leads me to the final thing that Candace Owens said. Basically, she put out a tweet where she said, blessed are the peacemakers and you cannot serve God and money. So there's obviously this passage from the Beatitudes that she is quoting here in Matthew 5. And I do find it interesting that she put it out there. I don't know if Candace Owens regularly just tweets, random passages of scripture, but I don't think that that's kind of her MO. That's not really her deal. But she did that. And Ben Shapiro thought it was, something that was kind of subliminally aimed at him. And whether it was or not, I don't know. But I do know this, is that Candace Owens was aiming that at someone. Was she aiming it at Nikki Haley? I think personally that what she was implying is that people who want to go to war are motivated by money, and the people who want to go in Israel who want to go to war, that might be their case as well. But then they're also either motivated by revenge, but they should be peacemakers. Not that they have a moral leg to stand on to retaliate and to go after their enemies so that they can make themselves safe and not be vulnerable to that sort of attack again, but that people who are advocating for retaliation against Hamas and the people in Palestine, that they're money hungry. Why else would she tweet it? And to me, what I don't really respect about what she has done is that she's trying to pretend like that was just a random tweet and it wasn't directed at anyone and it had no meaning. With respect to Ben Shapiro, I did think it was kind of a clown move for him to go out in some public place and talk trash about his colleague, but he should have went to her like a man and said, I don't appreciate what you're saying. I don't agree with what you're saying. It's deeply hurtful. I want you to chill, or let's have this conversation, because if you keep doing that, I'm telling you, I'm going to call you out publicly. He should have done that as a man. I thought it was weak sauce. I thought it was cowardly that he decided to make his first comments and to voice his displeasure about what she was saying, to do that publicly. I don't respect that. So I think there's blame to go around, but I think that the issue, this America First mentality, where they're assuming that everything that is outside of the borders of the United States is something that we shouldn't be involved in, and that serves our best interests. I think they need to do better. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are, right? This is obviously a little bit longer video than I normally do, but just let me know what your thoughts. Are you an America First person? Do you think, are you team Ben Shapiro or are you team Candace Owens? Let me know what you think in the comments. Till next time, friends, God bless you.